I would argue that most of the bands that were in our scene locally, some of them did obviously have that work ethic and they went on to be signed and do things, but a lot of them kind of just didn't. They were kind of in love with the idea of being in a band rather than in love with being in a band. So,
Mm.
because the reality is different to what it looks like externally. Playing the Royal Albert Hall, you've got to do something different. And, I'll be honest with you, we've never charged this amount of money for tickets before. And it's important to be open about that. It's expensive to do that kind of thing. It costs a lot. So you've got to make it worthwhile for the people that are spending their hard-earned money. It's got to be special, but also it is a chance to do something really different.
100 Reasons will soon play their biggest headline show ever, it appears, at the Royal Albert Hall in London. And it sounds like this will be something of a swan song for the band, which has come as a bit of a surprise in the last week or so. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have some time today to talk to their singer about the band's music and shows over the years, but also that enormous, momentous gig that is coming up this year. So, Colin, welcome. Thank you very much for your time today. Before we go into that gig, which I definitely want to touch on, to set some context, perhaps, for 100 Reasons, for anyone that's tuning in that is not familiar, your debut album, Ideas Above Our Station, was 23 years ago. So it was quite a career for this band. And looking back, what do you think were the contributing factors that had that album punch a hole through the UK rock scene the way it did back then? Because it ended up from a debut album, you played on Top of the Pops at one stage during that cycle. What do you think were the X factors involved for that being the success that it was?
I think it was just a coming together of like really good people that worked really hard at the label. I would like to say that we weren't slouches either. We worked really hard. We put the effort in. We took a lot of time behind the scenes. We had good management who were really helpful in developing us. And, we kind of, before we even got signed, treated being in a band like a proper second job. So no one was kind of phoning anybody up and saying, you're going to be at practice tonight or whatever. It was like, no, you're just there. So, we had that kind of ethos sort of quite early on. And I think just through that sort of sheer hard work and in conjunction with everything else, we managed to have the label help us reach the audience. And it was just, hard work, I think, from everybody. And obviously, without sounding too big-headed, but I thought we made a great record that people, were fortunate enough to connect with.
Yeah, I totally agreed. In fairness, the context as well is the songs are obviously good, which is very helpful. But there's usually something else that helps that acceleration. It sounds like the mindset approach meant that when opportunities presented themselves, all of you were able to jump in and deliver at the same time. So that's pretty important.
Yeah, it is. And I would argue that most of the bands that were in our scene locally, some of them did obviously have that work ethic and they went on to be signed and do things, but a lot of them kind of just didn't. They were kind of in love with the idea of being in a band rather than in love with being in a band. So, because the reality is different to what it looks like externally.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. There's a craft involved, especially if you want it to be a longevity thing. And if you want to go on tour extensively, that's a marathon, not a sprint. And you need to build the right muscles to do that. Now, what's interesting to me is there's some bands that you were playing with back then. I'm kind of looking at that era of bands like Hell is for Heroes and Rival Schools and even Ruben to an extent. I was listening to your discography as I was preparing for a chat. And there's kind of similarities in some ways between the sort of sounds. There's obviously uniqueness to each of the bands, but is there anything around the time that you folks were coming up with those other bands that you had mutual influences with them about that you could reference with them?
I mean, it's quite weird when you talk about Rival Schools because, we all love Quicksand, which is kind of one of the bands before Rival Schools that Walter was in. I mean, I was into sort of like hardcore punk and metal and things like that. So they were kind of, what I would say, in terms of like the Andy as well, who plays bass, was very influenced by that kind of music as well. Larry was more of a punk rock kind of guy, Fugazi, Minor Threat, stuff like that. And Andy Buse was very much into grunge and things. So we kind of had all these within rock, these kind of different influences that kind of tugged at each other throughout the sort of creative process. But again, I think, everyone was just writing great songs and great music and playing great shows. And I don't think anybody necessarily really thought about like what was influencing what, so I always say this, right? I'm a rock kid. So if I'm going to write music, it's probably going to have guitars in it because that's just what I like. And you write the music that you feel passionate about and care about. So yes, we're probably influenced in a subliminal way. We also got influenced a little bit by this band called Hum that were really good. And they had lots of sort of soundscapey kind of, it was a little bit that's kind of like they looked, if you were to kind of take a photo of Hum and a photo of Weezer, you might at the time struggle to tell the difference between the two bands, because they were kind of like that geek rock kind of thing that was doing the rounds sort of in the 90s. But they kind of just were heavier and that kind of thing. And they influenced us, I think, a little bit, definitely. And we did this song called Stories with Unhappy Endings. In the middle of that, there's a riff that's heavily, it doesn't sound like Hum, but it's influenced by Hum, because they have this song called Stars. And if you listen to this Hum Stars, there's a riff in that. And we thought we want to write a riff like that. And we did.
That's great. Yeah, there's a funny phenomenon I find that when musicians get together to form a band, they might have maybe even similar influences or music they listen to but they might create a sound that doesn't really expectedly hit that sweet spot. It sounds like the influences in your band are kind of more the harder edge of rock. And you have hard moments. There's scream vocal moments in 100 Reasons, but also there's fairly consistent, glorious choruses and harmonies within there, which perhaps from the influences you mentioned, I wouldn't have thought would have been baked in. Did it surprise you when you were forming the music with these lads that where it came out based on your kind of mutual interests in the beginning?
Well, that's the thing. You don't really sort of talk about it. You just get in a room and write. And the thing for us is we do like a big chorus. So something that's catchy that people can get behind. I love that stuff. I love this band called Coed and Cambria. And some of their records, like the choruses that Claudio comes up with, are fantastic. And you sit there and you think of the notation and the way that he sings it, and you go, there's no other way you could do that chorus. It's just perfect as it is. And they do that really, really well. And, you know, again, it's not like I'm influenced from Coheed, even though I like the band, because they kind of were doing the same thing around the same time as us. But I love that pop sensibility. It's an important thing. And I think, you know, sort of bringing that into the kind of music that you make, I think in some cases kind of is what sort of sets it apart a little bit. I also love this band from Copenhagen called Mew, who are just amazing. And they write incredible choruses, and they do like multi-layered harmonies and different kind of, you know, just incredible. Just listen to Mew, everybody. They're awesome.
Yeah, and it's been a fairly consistent thing I've noticed in 100 Reasons, because your album that came out in 2023, Glorious Sunset, the chorus in that is fantastic. I mean, that high note you start with is a sort of euphoric overall sound. Do you remember writing that? Because I don't really know how to understand how melody hooks come from. They just come from somewhere deep in the brain. But do you remember when was it a case of the guitars have that kind of moment? This is the chorus sort of bed underneath, and you went, what notes could go over the top of that? And you thought, I'll hit that, and then descend from there. How did that come about?
So it's like we wrote that last record in what you might call a very sort of non-normal way. And there would be times when Larry and I and the Andy would be at Larry's studio. There'd be times when it was just me and Larry. But you'd also, you know, everybody in the band's creative. So Andy Buse would send over some song ideas, which made the record. And the Andy kind of wrote Glorious Sunset pretty much, but with no vocals and no lyrics, and sort of sent all the music over, and with a few tweaks, but that was pretty much him doing all the music. You know, he'd record that at home and then send it, and me and Larry sort of worked on it. So the thing that everybody's, again, just people are kind of really good at writing, like in terms of understanding the vocals have to go over the top of stuff. They understand songs. So even though the Andy and that probably had no clue what I was actually going to do over the top of it, they sent that through. And that's what the Andy called it. The Andy called it Glorious Sunset. And
the name was there before you started the lyrics.
Yeah. So it wasn't really, it was a weird one, because the song was kind of on a couple of different levels anyway, like with the naming and everything. It kind of created itself, if that makes sense. And then just the mood of it musically is probably what drove me into the lyrics that I wrote, and the chorus that I wrote. So it was kind of like, here's a great idea. How do I bounce off of that and kind of make it everything it kind of needs to be? So I think I wrote maybe 3 sets of lyrics for it. And it was kind of like the last set where I kind of scrapped the old stuff, and it became kind of what it was. And it kind of came together when I was sitting there thinking, well, I've got to go to Larry's to record this properly now. And we hadn't had a scratch vocal.
Oh,
So normally we would do that, but because it was kind of sent, I'd just been listening to it and writing. So I hadn't been to Larry's studio to actually record it until we went to record it. And like I said, I had some ideas, and then everyone was just like, "This is great." So it was
lay
cool.
it
I mean,
down.
yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of a sort of a confidence, I think, in what all of us do, because I think we all understand, structure really,
Mm.
really well. And I think there's definitely a few sort of tweaks from Larry's side in terms of advice and everything. But I think the lyrics and the vocals kind of pretty much went in as I wanted them to be, and then just had a bit of tightening up with. Larry's an amazing producer, and he's amazing to work with in the studio, and he can be completely honest with me in terms of, if it's working or not, and if we need to go back to it or change this or change that. So he's brilliant at that. But we didn't really need to do it much with this record, if at all. It was more just like a few different sort of tweaks here and there. But I always say this, I've said it in loads of interviews, but the really good songs that they kind of write themselves. Someone's got a
Mm.
great idea, and all you really need to do, like I said, is kind of do it justice. And I think that's kind of how it came about. But you just kind of listen to it and go, yeah, I've got a couple of ideas here. This one sounds good. I like this one. And then you go in and try it out, and hopefully people agree. But it was just such an easy process writing that last record, because everybody was just on the same page and no one was forcing anything, and everything that everyone was sending over. There's quite a lot on the cutting room floor, which didn't sort of, I think, thematically and musically maybe suit the mood of the record. But yeah, everything was great pretty much.
That's handy. Yeah, it does have that sense, that album. It feels like a very natural expression of feeling first, and then structurally the lyrics kind of, colorize that, I think, from there. And to your point about structure of songwriting, if he's going to be sending you essentially a full song without the vocals over it, you'd need to have that understanding to send you what is a chorus section that isn't so
Yeah.
busy that lyrics wouldn't cut through in the rest. That's quite a skill.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, stuff like that kind of does get tweaked a little bit, I think, when we end up in the actual proper recording process. But the Andy's always been everybody in the band actually is an amazing songwriter. I mean, we don't sort of talk about this too much because a lot of people, I think, from just what I've spoken to people, it's not true. But I think people think that sort of Larry and I are kind of this partnership or whatever. But there's that, Andy Buse has written some of the best songs that we've had. The Andy's done exactly the same, and that goes right back to the first record and everything in between. Everybody in the band's really creative and kind of understands what everyone's sort of trying to do. It's a good thing.
That's great. I mean, it sounds very cohesive. I was wondering, that album came out after something like a 16-year kind of hiatus between records. What was there one kind of main core reason that brought everyone back together for that time? Is that something about how connected you can, how you can work together, that made that somewhat of a seamless return?
Well, I think the idea was essentially we were going to be playing some shows, and we didn't want to kind of just be, don't want to be sort of milking stuff from 20 years ago. But we were kind of feeling that it would be a good time to maybe let's just go in the studio and see what happens. And that essentially was what it was. And it could have been great. Could have been like the worst thing ever. But we went in, and we're not a band that talks to each other all the time at all. So we're not like in each other's, faces every week or whatever. I mean, we go months and months without talking sometimes. And that's just okay, because we can just fall in and out of each other's lives as and when, and it's totally cool. But we literally all it was me, the Andy, and Larry. I think Larry and the Andy kind of went to Larry's studio for a bit during the day. I finished my day job because I have one. And then I went to the studio in the evening, and obviously they were there, and they'd written this music. And then I had some ideas to go, I was all about this, let's try this. And it was Right There With You, which is on that record. And we just all came away going, wow. And it's just a demo with a scratch vocal, but everyone's really feeling like amazing about like the process. So we're like, yeah, we'll do some more of this then. And then obviously it became the record. But if it hadn't worked, we probably all would have just walked away from the idea of, because the whole thing for us was that at the stage that we even are in our lives in general, but we don't have to force anything anymore. No one was expecting new music from us. And we kept it really quiet for that reason until we knew that we had actually had something really good. And then we were like halfway through the record, like writing it, and everything was really good, like really good. And I think we were all a little bit kind of astonished. And then Andy Buse would send over an idea for a song, and you'd be like, oh, okay, this is amazing. Now let's play around with this and what we do. So everyone was just brilliant. It was easy.
it'd be criminal not to go forward and have those songs form into recording and release. Then if it's
Yeah, and
going
that's
that
how it
well.
felt. That's how it felt.
Nice. I can't remember the chronological order of this, but because in that same year you played Download Festival that came out. Was that one of the shows you had booked to play prior to the thing about writing those songs, or did that start happening in kind of late 2022? The writing
Yeah,
of it.
well, I think we started writing in COVID
Right.
when we were allowed to, and then we kind of went from there, really. And I think we had the songs written for probably about maybe 6 months to a year before we kind of got around to actually going, right, now's the time to record. Because again, everyone's busy and everyone's doing stuff. And Andy Buse recorded his drums in LA in a studio that was like remotely
Gosh.
set up. So like there's this thing that you have called audio movers, which a lot of people use in the industry now to work remotely. So you set up the studio, Busey goes in, plays his drums, but Larry's in London, like monitoring it and hearing it like it's actually happening live and being able to
So
sort of
wild.
direct and stuff. And it's amazing. So once Andy had found the time to be able to kind of go and do that, then like the recording process kind of took over properly. And then I think the Andy came down because he's a machine. So his bass was probably done in, probably all of his tracks were probably done in less than the running time of the record because he's that efficient. But he just came in, he laid it all down really quickly because he just does. And then Larry started putting some guitars down, and then it was obviously time for vocals. And it all just kind of fed in and fed in and fed in. So we didn't have Download or anything like that booked in. I think Download came as a result of the fact that people knew that at least temporarily we were doing some stuff again. But also we weren't really sitting there thinking like this is going to be some big comeback and let's try and, you know, recapture something from a really long time ago. The extent of our commitment was, okay, this sounds like a good idea. That's all we're doing for the time being. And then somebody comes up with another good idea and that's what you're doing next. But you're not really thinking, let's try and revitalize some career here. So yeah, it's kind of where we're at.
Well, it sounds like a very healthy approach because then you can just enjoy the moment for whatever that is without the expectation or worrying about anyone else's expectations as well, let alone your own. I'm interested then coming up to what is a monumental gig at the Royal Albert Hall. I understand this is a kind of bucket list item for the band. They're hoping this is something they could do at some stage. And it turns out this is put it forward as the final headline show for this band. I'm wondering a couple of things. One, what is it about that venue, do you think, that's made that the kind of collective venue that you'd all like to play as a particular thing? And also, what is in the language of last headline gig? Does that leave the door open for potential other festivals or things? Or is it very much, you know, I don't know, what's the full stop in mind here?
Yeah, I think it's just don't do another sort of headlining show. And if we end up on a festival bill in a few years' time, then because it sounds good, then that might happen. But I think the thing for us is it's very difficult. Well, actually, no, it's not difficult. We always actually have to look far ahead because of what everyone else is doing. So if you do a festival, it wouldn't be next year anyway, because, you know, we've got stuff that everyone else is doing. Andy Buse goes on tour all the time. And he's at the moment, I think, working with Kylie Minogue. He's worked with Pearl Jam. He works with Queen and Adam Lambert. So those are really big, long tours when they take place. So he's like booked up. And obviously we know what he's doing probably next year, but publicly that's not something that you can share. But the point is that, you know, you can't just go, well, let's just book that. So even the Albert Hall, but before we announced it, that had already been in the calendar like 6 months before we'd even announced it to the public, because we have to plan that far ahead. So when we're kind of thinking about something like the Albert Hall, you go, well, what could you do after that? And I think as a band, in terms of where we are in our size or whatever and what we do, I don't think there's really anything else really to do. And then I think you get to the point where we've seen it with bands before, where it becomes this exercise in diminishing returns because you just won't stop what you're doing. And I think the idea is just, it's 25 years. Let's just have this one big last hurrah, you know, come and see us. We're going to do some really cool stuff and some different things that we haven't done before, which I think is really exciting, and kind of have this kind of like proper send off. And then if we rear our heads at a festival bill somewhere, it's probably because it's a really good idea to do it and it's a really cool thing. But even the nature, like we say, of booking festivals is difficult because we have to literally book stuff like almost like 2 years in advance. The download thing was almost like accidental, like that we had the time, because I'm pretty sure that Andy Buse would have had to have been in the UK a couple of days beforehand because he went and worked with Lana Del Rey, I think. So he's like, or it was 2000 Trees or something, I think it was actually. But the point was that how's your schedule looking? And if we wanted to, not to say we would have got the slot, but I would have loved to have kind of done the Deftones show this year or something. But Andy's busy and we won't do it without him. And that's no slight on Andy. He's got the right to absolutely do that. But for us, it's all about, I turned down a show at Slam Dunk Festival because it was like my son's birthday, or something last year or whatever it was. So our priorities are kind of just in different places. But the thing is, whenever we get on stage, it's still like the best feeling ever. And that never changes. And that, I think the fact that we're kind of doing it sporadically or with meaning has what's made it amazing. You're not on this kind of daily grind because you're like, I've got to do 20 shows or something. And then by the end of it, you're just worn out and knackered. And you're playing to 200 people doing it because that's what your life is now. And I don't think we really want to do that.
Makes total sense. Yeah. I can see
so.
that. Yeah, of course. Having explained all that, yes. And I was lucky enough I go to Download Festival every year, and I caught your set over there on the second stage.
Oh, cool.
And it was phenomenal. And it had that, it exuded that energy of like, this is a moment we can all enjoy together. But also it had the finesse of a band that has been, honing their craft over the years, even if not touring and the rest for those that time in there. But there was a professional sheen to it, but also a human element that came through. And it was an amazing thing. And I'm sure those that can go to the Royal Albert Hall will have a phenomenal experience there. And I understand there's going to be a string section as well to elevate this.
Yeah,
did the song replicate, perhaps, like inspire that? Because there's that element there that, well, how would we ever do this live?
Well, the thing is, is that you're playing the Royal Albert Hall, you've got to do something different. And, I'll be honest with you, we've never charged this amount of money for tickets before. And it's important to be open about that. It's expensive to do that kind of thing. It costs a lot. So you've got to make it worthwhile for the people that are spending their hard-earned money. It's got to be special, but also it is a chance to do something really different. And I don't know if it necessarily came about from Replicate. I think it just more came about from the occasion of the Royal Albert Hall. You can't just plonk your gear on stage and do a rock show. We are going to do some rocking, trust me. But you can't just do that for 90 minutes or whatever and then see you later, thanks a lot, because you can do that in any venue, anywhere. So the real thing kind of came about from that sort of sense of occasion, and then spending time sort of arranging the songs that we want to arrange, like with strings, to see how that's working and if there's actually a vibe to it. And there is, by the way, is a very good vibe to it as we've been working on that. And, we've been re-recording some of our songs as well with strings, which I think is really exciting. And I don't think I've told anybody else that, so apologies to everyone else in the band if I've let the cat out of the bag a bit early. But, so it's exciting and it's cool, and you have to, like, at the end of the day, the one thing we've never, ever done is rip off our fan base. So you've got to do something that's sort of worthy of the occasion, I think, to justify those things.
Sure. Especially if you're going to make this like a final hurrah. You also want to walk away from that feeling good about every decision you made as part of that. That sounds definitely in keeping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why that venue in particular is what's put that at the top of the list of what you wanted to do venue-wise?
Well, I think when we finished the last tour in 2023 and we kind of finished at the Hammersmith Apollo, it might be the Ventum Apollo, but it's always Hammersmith Apollo to me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And they were kind of talking about sort of what's next, and we were like, well, nothing, not in like a weird way, but that kind of like just nothing. We're fine, we're cool, and I think also as well, like from my perspective, and I've said this to the guys in the band, and this isn't like a weird thing or anything, but I think I let out so much on the last record. I haven't really had the inclination to write more 100 Reasons music. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't or would never do that, but I think I just felt like creatively spent with those guys, at least for the time being. So they kind of talked about the Albert Hall, and we were like, well, do you know what? If you think we can do it, we'd like to do it, because it'd be kind of rude not to. And I think it was kind of a management and promoter discussion with our booking agent, and everyone's like, this would be a great idea, this would be really cool. And then we were like, well, that can't do it like next year because it's 2024 and it's kind of, we've just done this. And when you kind of think about making it special, oh, hang on, it's 25 years of the band. So that's a great kind of thing to do. And then as we're planning for it and talking about things more and more, and again, we just, like I said, we're not the type of band I think that would ever kind of suddenly jump up to arena level. You know, it's not going to happen for us. And again, I don't mean that in a negative way, just honest, you know. So then there's kind of nothing else to do other than flog the dead horse. So, and again, like we say, that's just never something we've ever been down with. So the idea of doing that was just the best idea. And the whole reason behind, like I was saying, last ever sort of headline show is because, you know, go out on a high.
Yeah. I love the whole concept of it. I when I first discovered the band, it was via probably a music video that was on MTV2 or something. And then I was at an age where I was maybe late teens and not able to go to a bunch of gigs. So I would read like Kerrang magazine, and I saw a review of 100 Reasons show, and it just sounded like the most energetic, like unhinged, hard rocking show ever. And I was like, this is now my new favorite band. Like, that must be crazy. And for that band now to be like in the Royal Albert Hall, I think it's a wonderful way to cap off 25 years. It feels like a grand sort of environment for it.
It is as well, and I think I don't know why, but in my head I kind of justify it a little bit like when you see like a TV show that goes on longer than it should, you know, and you're like, you should have, you know, when you go, they should have ended 2 seasons ago or something like that, because they're just, you know, like The Walking Dead or something, you know, which started out great and then just became a little bit more, you know, well, in my opinion at least anyway. But that's the way I kind of see things. I don't like the idea of, I guess, just kind of fizzling out, because that's kind of worse. So just go out with a bang, hopefully.
Yeah. How on earth do you go about approaching, you don't have to tell us any details about it, but approaching a set list for an event like this? Because you're like, well, there's so many songs to choose from. How do you want to mark the final gig? I'm presuming there's going to be a span across those, but how long has the process been of figuring out what on earth you're going to play?
Well, essentially, it normally starts with Andy Buse going, I would like to play these songs, and puts like a set list together because he lives that stuff. He loves it. And then we end up sort of tweaking it a little bit and talking about things through WhatsApp groups and things like that. So, and then it's like, well, I'd like to play that. And then it's like, well, okay, well, if we're going to be doing songs with strings, what ones are we going to do and how we're going to do that? And then you go, well, I think this would be really cool and that would be really cool. And then Larry kind of goes away and plays around with stuff, and he'll just add some, you know, artificial strings and stuff to songs and that kind of thing. And then we see how that sounds and go, well, okay, that seems to be working, so that's worth exploring further. So it's quite a long-winded process, but not in a bad way, because it's, again, it's something that you want to do and it's enjoyable, and you're trying to sit there and think, oh, that's really cool, or oh, that's a shame that doesn't maybe work as much as we'd like it to, or whatever. So there's a lot of kind of experimentation, like to try and sort of get it right. Because of what we're doing. Whereas before, when you're kind of just doing your standard rock show, it's like, right, make sure, I mean, we'll definitely be playing our biggest songs, but you got to play those, and you go, well, how do we change up a little bit every night, but not, you know, make it too different or whatever. But yeah, it's an art form, I think.
Yes, a logistical and creative art form. So have you got it nailed now, or do you have a set list that you're now sort of rehearsing at this stage, or is it still kind of being tweaked? It's a couple months to go here, right?
Yeah, stuff's being tweaked. And again, we're not, without sounding big-headed, we don't normally have to rehearse too much, but we have a lot. You'd be surprised how much is in muscle memory. And essentially, we all kind of understand what's going to be going on with the sort of the changed songs, if you will, or restructured songs. And then we'll have some days of pre-production before, with the string section and stuff, before we actually go and play the show. So we will be rehearsed and we will know what we're doing, which is kind of the most important thing. But we've always been quite lucky. I mean, I think even before our last tour, we had a warm-up show, which was great. And I think we maybe had a week of rehearsals before then. And a lot of that, probably about, I would say at least the first 2 days I wasn't even there, because they were still setting stuff up and making sure everything worked. And these are the sounds, like, you know, and again, working on sounds that we created for the new record, making sure we can, you know, replicate those, you know, and making sure that sounds good. So we don't sort of do tons of rehearsing, because everybody kind of knows what they're doing already. And yeah, so we've got days booked in for like a full setup, proper pre-production kind of thing. And we'll do some rehearsing at Larry's, because he's got a studio there as a band, just to do some stuff, and then we'll hook up with the string section before we do the actual thing.
Very cool. I'm sure that's going to sound absolutely epic. I suppose before we close our conversation here, I'd love to get a sense of what's going to be happening for yourself post this gig and post 100 Reasons. I know you're also in They Fall for the Sky. And I saw a comment on a YouTube video of your Top of the Pops performance, and it said, where is it now? We find the exact quote. It said, "The lead singer now teaches music business at my college, and he's so awesome, I can't even put it into words." So is that what the future looks like for yourself? There's some music creation, but also you're doing kind of music business bits and pieces.
Yeah, I do. I teach at a great production school called Point Blank, which is in London. They have other areas like LA and stuff, but they're just amazing. They're the greatest people, and they are incredibly supportive, and it's great students, and I get to help them out. Really, I do teach them, but I generally look at sort of trying to make sure that when they go into the music industry, they're doing it with their eyes open. Nice. And understanding, not just the pitfalls, but obviously the good things too. But, when they're starting their journey, I'm just all about empowerment and helping those, people try and, like I say, just go in with a bit more knowledge. I learned everything through trial and error like a lot of other people do. But if you can go in with a bit of extra ammunition, you can hopefully just make your journey that little bit shorter, in terms of getting in on a professional level. So that's what I try to do. And it's great. Nice. It's rewarding. It's brilliant. I'm not one of those bitter musicians or anything like that, kind of sits and think, oh, don't bother with that, or it was this and it was terrible or whatever. I'm open to my students and say, not everything is perfect, but generally the music industry is awesome. And if you find the right people around you and get to be creative and do what you want to do, there's really nothing better.
Yeah. And you might play the Royal Albert Hall one day. You never know.
No, you never know, right?
And then for music creation after the fact, do you have plans with other bands and things, or is that unknown?
It's not necessarily unknown, but I do still have lots of ideas, which I have stored safely. And I think I am looking to explore those and do something with them. So what that will be or how that turns out, I don't know yet. See what happens. But I do still kind of have to be creative. I still have to do things. And I don't think that's ever going to change. And that'll be the same for anybody that's in a band. So I think from that perspective, we'll see what happens. I'm sure there will be something. But as to what that is, I don't think even I've really genuinely thought about it too much.
Cool. Yeah, I can understand. It'd be hard to just turn off that tap entirely. And so we'll see what happens there. Well, best of luck with this big, massive, amazing gig coming up at the Royal Albert Hall. Thank you very, very much indeed for your time. And we'll see what happens in the future, perhaps in the music universe for yourself as well. Cheers, Colin. Massive.
Amazing.
Appreciate it.
No, thanks, Steve. That was great. Great fun. Thank you.
Well, having been a fan of that band when I was a teenager, that was such a cool moment to have that conversation at this sort of bookend of the band's career. What a surreal moment to be part of there. That gig coming up at the Royal Albert Hall, I'm sure is going to be absolutely incredible. So if you are interested in going and checking that out, and you're based in the UK, or if you're not, I guess you could fly to the UK, do go check out some tickets if they're still available. Thank you very much again for listening to this. If you'd like to subscribe to this, that'd be super helpful. Helps this channel to grow. And then you can see more of these episodes and interviews in future. I'll be sure to add some links in the description to 100 Reasons social media platforms. So you can keep up to date with any festivals that they do end up playing in future, if they do. Thank you again for tuning in. Hopefully you'll enjoy another one of these interviews very soon.